I'll be honest, I don't particularly like seeing myself on a big screen or being in the spotlight, but that's never been what this has been about. Like many of you, I did not speak up for attention or for reward. I spoke up because it was right. And for doing so, me and many of us in this room were censored, smeared, or silenced. We were called conspiracy theorists, reckless, and dangerous. But what we said, sometimes at great personal cost, is now being echoed by the very officials who once dismissed us. Sure, being vindicated feels good, but watching the narrative shift so unashamedly and unapologetically has been galling. What has changed is not the facts. Those speaking the truth have remained consistent throughout. But the belief system used to categorize us has changed. The framework was devised by the US Department for Homeland Security, a counterterrorism body, not a scientific one. Misinformation is falsehoods shared through ignorance. Disinformation is lies spread with malicious intent. And malinformation is the truth, but considered damaging to the narrative or to the government. All were to be minimized or even silenced. So let that sink in. The truth was rebranded as a threat. Now, the real danger wasn't a virus or even the disastrous policies and ethical breaches. It was propaganda and psychological manipulation, a system of information control that treated truth as an enemy. And that is why campaigning matters, and that is why working together matters. Those in power still live in a bubble where inconvenient truths remain unacknowledged. It's long past time to accept that lockdowns did not work and could not work. You cannot control an airborne virus. That's not a technicality. It refutes the core claim to justify the lockdowns. The stickers, one-way systems, and masking were all scientific nonsense. It's long past time to accept that deaths attributed to COVID were not inevitable deaths due to a virus. They included overdiagnosis, as well as under-treatment thanks to do not resuscitate orders, denial of antibiotics, and over-treatment with respiratory depressant drugs, morphine and midazolam. It's long past time to accept that injected vaccines did not work and could not work on a mucosal respiratory virus. Injected vaccines do not prevent infections, and this was known before 2020 and has been admitted since by Fauci. Infection rates among household contacts stayed at 10% before and after the rollout. Waves of COVID in the USA and across Europe, as measured by virus in the wastewater, hospitalizations, or deaths, were unchanged before and after the rollout. However, every wave had an outlier in the data. And in summer 2021, after the rollout, the outliers were the UK, Portugal, and Ireland. But it would be naive to claim that a vaccine worked when it only appears to work in 3 places. From 2022, the Omicron variant meant COVID was far less deadly, including for the unvaccinated. But worse than the lack of benefit, there was harm. Since rollout, we've seen increased disability among working-aged adults and excess non-COVID deaths, including in countries with minimal prior COVID. Harm was seen across multiple organ systems, and the biological mechanisms can explain this: vascular damage, immune attacks, and cell death from inflammation. Now, our diagnostic systems separate symptoms by organ, and as a result, the signal is diluted across categories, and broader patterns are harder to detect. But the signal is clear in the totals. The total disability data is many times higher than any estimate of long COVID. The other clear signal is in the mortality data. Cardiac-related ambulance calls in England spiked in 2021 by 50 to 100 additional incidents per day, and they remain elevated. But if unvaccinated people were the ones driving the overall excess, we'd have to be dying in huge numbers. And why would we be? Data on deaths by vaccination status shows that vaccinated were healthier but died too much after the rollout. The extra deaths were almost all cardiac mortality, but post-mortems have been increasingly difficult to obtain. And even when they are carried out, tests for vaccines as a cause are inadequate, and findings such as heart scarring or coronary artery inflammation are dismissed as not being vaccine-related, even when no other cause is identified. One example is the case of Adam Meindl. He's a healthy 30-year-old father who suffered a fatal cardiac event after a single dose of Moderna, a drug known to cause inflammation of the heart. He developed fever and signs of heart inflammation, but was unable to access a GP during lockdown. He then had a massive heart attack, and doctors found a very long clot in an inflamed coronary artery with no coronary disease in the vessel wall. His heart surgeon described widespread inflammation and abnormally thin heart muscle and said the heart attack was clearly superimposed on another underlying pathology. Yet no post-mortem was performed, and the inquest recorded the cause as natural. If a case with such striking features of vaccine damage can be ruled natural, then our system for recognizing and measuring vaccine harm is clearly not fit for purpose. Too many deaths like Adam's have been dismissed without thorough investigation, and you should bear that in mind when officials claim that the only vaccine-related deaths are those with vaccination written on the death certificate. Even when deaths have been admitted, there has been a stubborn belief that sacrificing people was somehow worth it for a greater good. That is morally abhorrent. From the outset, Hart and others raised alarms. We wrote letters, reviewed data, and showed that official claims frequently contradicted the evidence. In September 2022, Hart had already shown, time and again, that the vaccine had not prevented infections or deaths. To try and finally be heard, we used official UK government data, despite knowing its flaws and biases would exaggerate the benefit, and we asked one simple question. How many people would need to be vaccinated to prevent a single COVID-labelled death during the Delta wave, which was summer 21? The results were staggering. 230 over 80s to prevent one COVID-labelled death. Thousands of 50 to 69-year-olds. Tens of thousands of 30 to 49-year-olds, and nearly 100,000 18 to 30-year-olds. Just think about that for a second. Nearly 100,000 young adults for one COVID-labelled death based on biased data. The benefit claims did not hold. A month later, in October 2022, the UK Health Security Agency finally presented almost identical calculations to us, but they based theirs on modelled assumptions. The benefits were still negligible to non-existent. Finally, the Joint Committee for Vaccinations and Immunisations, the JCVI, who make the recommendations, began to reverse course. Third doses were first stopped for healthy under 50s, then under 75s, and eventually boosters were declared not cost-effective for anyone healthy under the age of, wait for it, 90 years old. By 2024, only over 75s, care home residents and those with severe immune conditions were eligible, along with health and social care staff. But by the end of that year, 86% of NHS staff had refused the autumn booster. They knew. The public led the way. In the UK, only 10% of primary school children were vaccinated, just half of secondary school children. And that stands in sharp contrast to much of the Western world, and especially the USA, where horrifyingly children as young as 6 months old are still receiving routine boosters. The difference was thanks to campaigners. Hart, the UK Medical Freedom Alliance, Perseus, Safer to Wait, and many others. People who came together to write, speak, protest, and to protect children. And we keep coming together because there is still more to do. Some thought the COVID inquiry would bring truth, but so far it hasn't. It's slow, politically cautious, and shaped by the same mindset that led us here. Those who got it wrong aren't being seriously challenged, and those who are silenced are still excluded. They're talking to the wrong people if they want to learn lessons. This isn't a path to truth, it's a path to self-justification. Hart applied for core participant status in the COVID inquiry, but was rejected. We were invited to submit a written statement, and we did. At first, the inquiry's legal team offered to help us upload our 1,000 references to their clunky system. But at the last minute, that support was withdrawn. Worse, we were told we could only submit 10% of the sources that we felt were needed to support our case. As a result, our statement was only accepted after the vaccine module had almost finished, and by then it was too late to shape the conversation. We weren't surprised. That's why we had already begun working together with UK Medical Freedom Alliance, Perseus, and the Children's COVID Vaccine Advisory Council to share our findings publicly. And that work is now available through the People's Vaccine Inquiry. Now, many of us believe that the United States, with its historic culture of open debate, decentralized governance, and the Maha campaign, might lead the way out of this, that they might be the first to acknowledge the harms and to correct course. But it is all so slow. As of today, the CDC website continues to recommend COVID vaccines for pregnant women and babies, and many universities still require it for enrollment. Removing COVID shots from the childhood schedule helps legally for liability reasons, but that's a long-term game. In the UK, pregnant women and students are also still being injected. Let me take you through why that is so outrageous. In the 8 months leading up to April 2021, when vaccines for pregnant women began in the UK, 8 pregnant women had died with a COVID label. 7 were from ethnic minority backgrounds, 3 were drug users. None were treated with antivirals or antibiotics despite the risk of pneumonia, and all died after giving birth when their postnatal care was frequently absent. These were not deaths because of viral attack. They were failures of care among those at most risk of pregnancy complications. Yet those 8 deaths led to claims that every pregnant woman needed to be injected. In that first year, for each mother that died with a COVID label, there were 63,000 pregnant women who did not. If the vaccine was a miracle that could prevent all COVID-labeled deaths, around 63,000 women and their babies have to be exposed to a novel product with uncertain consequences to prevent that death. That number should have been on every leaflet, every consent form, every press briefing. It was not, and women were never told the truth. They were told it was safe and essential, that it would protect mother and baby. Officials ignored the rise in abortions for fetal anomalies during the early rollout. They refused to investigate the neonatal death spikes in Scotland that correlated with the vaccine. And after vaccines, COVID deaths doubled, ICU admissions doubled, and there have been unprecedented clotting-related deaths among pregnant women. No investigation, no cause, just more injections. We need to dismantle the pandemic planning industry, people whose careers depend on worst-case scenarios, terrifying the public to justify their funding and authority. No one is allowed to ask, is this proportionate? Are these assumptions even real? As far back as 2010, Dame Deirdre Hine warned in a government report that we must not treat pandemic modelers like court astrologers, but that's exactly what they became. We need open debate with accountable experts who have a breadth of opinions and public policy grounded in reality. Change is slow, but we are not giving up. We've got here because we worked together. We spoke up when it was hard, lonely, and causing us direct harm. We made space for truth in a world that was doing its best to crush it. There is strength in standing together, but I believe many of us have also felt the presence of something greater, a strength that wasn't our own. For me, that strength came from God, and I believe he brought many of us together, not just for each other's sake, but for truth's sake. And through that strength, we stood for ethical principles. Together we forced change. Together we moved the window for discussion. For the future, we know the formula: speak, share, stand together. We didn't change. The truth doesn't change. But because we stood together, the world has begun to. Thank you.